Hello. Just wanted to make a video. Um, Basically, just because I've been reading a whole bunch of my favorites: Walt Whitman, William Gaddis, Herman Melville, Cormac McCarthy, James Joyce, and various others. And I've been hearing unbelievably stupid things said about them. And there's this interview with McCarthy and David Krakauer where David asks him, they're talking about the intelligence of whales and the size of their brains. And McCarthy just gets done saying that whales have very large brains, and dinosaurs only needed a brain the size of a golf ball. So, it's evolutionarily expensive for these whales to have large brains. And then David asks, what do you say to people who think humans are the only animals with intelligence? And McCarthy simply says, well, they don't know what they're talking about. And I've been feeling that exact same way more than I would like lately. Encountering people who have no idea what they're talking about. It's like that scene in No Country for Old Men where Sugar asks the convenience store owner, you have no idea what you're talking about, do you? But yeah, so this first reading is going to be in honor of my modernism teacher who has no idea what he's talking about, because he's teaching us the origins of modernism, and he doesn't know anything about Whitman's poetry. He only knows about his literary criticism. So I'm going to read, in honor of my stupid teacher, some of Whitman's poetry. This is the famous part from Song of Myself, part 51. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm wearing my Einstein shirt. My dad drew that, and one of my mom's friends put it on this t-shirt and got it for me. So, it's one of my favorite shirts. This is part 51 of Song of Myself. Originally published in 1855, 3 years after Moby Dick. The past and present wilt, I have filled them, emptied them, and proceed to fill my next fold of the future. Listener up there, what have you to confide to me? Look in my face while I snuff the sidle of evening. Talk honestly. No one else hears you, and I stay only a minute longer. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. I concentrate toward them that are nigh. I wait on the door slab. Who has done his day's work? Who will soonest be through with his supper? Who wishes to walk with me? Will you speak before I am gone? Will you prove already too late? The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest and true as any on the shadow's wilds. It coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged, Missing me one place, search another. I stopped somewhere, waiting for you. That's the end of Song of Myself, which my stupid teacher doesn't know. And let's see what else. So, it's another section I want to read that is very excellent. And let me see if I can find it. So yeah, there is someone who said unbelievably stupid things about Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, and in honor of those indefensible and stupid things, I'm gonna read an excellent bit from it. Alright, this is on page roughly 54 of the book, and so the kid is in a band of scalp hunters in the Mexico-Texas border area in the mid-1800s, around the time that Melville is writing his romance, Typee and Umu. So, and this is how it goes. The first of the herd began to swing past them in a pall of yellow dust, rangy, slat-ribbed cattle with horns that grew agoggle and no two alike, and small, thin mules, coal-black, that shouldered one another and reared their mallet-shaped heads above the backs of the others, and then more cattle, and finally the first of the herders riding up the outer side and keeping the stock between themselves and the mounted company. Behind them came a herd of several hundred ponies. The sergeant looked for Candelario. He kept backing along the ranks, but he could not find him. He nudged his horse through the column and moved up the far side. The lattermost of the drovers were now coming through the dust, and the captain was gesturing and shouting. The ponies had begun to veer off from the herd, and the drovers were beating their way toward this armed company met with on the plain. Already you could see through the dust on the ponies' hides the painted chevrons, and the hands and rising suns and birds, and fish of every device like the shade of old work through sizing on a canvas. And now, too, you could hear, above the pounding of the unshod hooves, the piping of the quena, flutes made from human bones, and some among the company had begun to saw back on their mounts, and some to mill in confusion, when up from the off-side of those ponies there rose a fabled horde of mounted lancers and archers, bearing shields bedight with bits of broken mirror-glass, that cast 1,000 unpieced suns against the eyes of their enemies. A legion of horribles, hundreds in number, half naked or clad in costumes Attic or biblical, or wardrobed out of a fevered dream with the skins of animals and silk finery, and pieces of uniform still tracked with the blood of prior owners, coats of slain dragoons, frogged and braided cavalry jackets, one in a stovepipe hat and one with an umbrella, and one in white stockings and a blood-stained wedding veil, and some in headgear of crane feathers or rawhide helmets that bore the horns of bull or buffalo, and one in a pigeon-tailed coat worn backwards and otherwise naked, and one in the armor of a Spanish conquistador, the breastplate and pauldrons deeply dented with old blows of mace or saber done in another country, by men whose very bones were dust, and many with their braids spliced up the hair of their other beasts, until they trailed upon the ground with their horses' ears. until they trailed upon the ground, and their horses' ears and tails worked up with bits of brightly colored cloth, and one whose horse's whole head was painted crimson red, and all the horsemen's faces gaudy and grotesque, with daubings like a company of mounted clowns, deaf hilarious, all howling in a barbarous tongue, and riding down upon them like a horde from hell, more horrible yet than the brimstone land of Christian reckoning, screeching and yammering, and clothed in smoke like those vaporous beings in regions beyond right knowing, where the eye wanders, and the lip jerks and drools. "Oh my God," said the sergeant. And by the way, that is in the first draft of Blood Meridian. And that's all I have to say about that. Let's see, what else? What else do I have here? Oh yeah, and then I've been reading Paradise Lost, and which is of course excellent. And I've been noticing quite a few similarities between Paradise Lost and Finnegan's Wake. The obvious connections to Joyce, extremely technically talented writers who eventually had either bad eyesight or went blind, tried to encompass the whole world in their works. Many of the narrated sections of Paradise Lost mention waking up or seeing light or dreams. The section where Satan whispers into Eve's ear and causes her to have a dream which taints her mind and foreshadows what's going to happen. Well, anyway, of course, a river run past Eve and Adams is how Finnegan's Wake starts. But I want to read the last page of Finnegan's Wake. Because it's good. And because I have another teacher who thinks Joyce is pretentious and not worth the trouble. So here is the last page of Finnegan's Wake. Sad and weary I go back to you, my cold father, my cold mad father, my cold mad fiery father, till the near sight of the mere size of him, the moils and moils of it, moan-own-owning, makes me sea silt salt sick, and I rush, my only, into your arms. I see them rising, save me from those terrible prongs. 2 more, 1, 2 Mormons more, so avalaval, my leaves have drifted from me, all, but one clings still. I'll bear it on me, to remind me of Lif, so soft this morning hours. Yes, carry me along, Taddy, like you done through the toy fair. If I seen him bearing down on me now under white spread wings like he'd come from archangels, I think I'd die down over his feet, humbly dumbly, only to worship. Yes, Tid. There's where, first, we pass through grass, behush the bush to wish, a gull, gulls, far calls, coming far, end here, us then, Finn again, take, bus off thee, me more me, till thousands thee, lips, the keys to, given, away, alone, a last, a loved, along the. So, that's in honor of people who don't know what they're talking about. And Yeah, there's, I believe I recall Harold Bloom saying that The Confidence Man is not a masterpiece. So I think I'm going to read some of that too. And, oh yeah, there was actually one thing that in my last video I was talking about Miklos Senkuthi and the St. Orpheus Breviary, and in the introduction it says, you know, Orpheus, the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Eurydice is in the underworld, and Orpheus goes to rescue her, or to get her out, and they agree to let her out. If only Orpheus doesn't turn around while they're walking out. And as they're walking out of Hades, the long way, he can't help but turn around to see his love. And then she's sucked back into the underworld, and he never sees her again. And then he travels the whole world, making all the animals and trees and people cry and weep with him, because he plays the music so beautifully. And in this introduction, this person mentions how Senkuthi loved to think, and in the same way that Orpheus couldn't help but look back at his lover Eurydice, and when she was taken from him was infinitely sad. In the same way, someone who loves thinking is completely distraught whenever their thoughts are taken away. And yeah, I don't really like sleeping because of that. It's you know, it's like, if you sleep how long you're supposed to, it's like 8 hours, and then all you get out of it is like a half-assed dream on average. And if I could have been awake during those 8 hours, I could have actually had way more interesting stuff going on. But of course that's a little simplistic. But alright, let me see what chapter I wanted to read. Oh yeah, and you'll have to pardon me for making this video. I've just been so annoyed by people who have no idea what they're talking about. And for some unbelievable reason, they seem confident. And like, for example, my modernism teacher, who should be fired, at one point quoted Goethe as saying, poetry should be incomprehensible. And I thought to myself, that seems, you know, uncharacteristic of Goethe to say that, considering that I've read several of his works and parts of his autobiography and Italian Journey, 500 pages of him writing about his thoughts. And so after class, I went to the teacher's office hours and I asked him, "Where did you get that?" Because I hadn't heard of it. And I like Goethe quite a lot. And he said, oh, he looked around his office for 2 minutes, found this book. And it ended up being a paraphrase of the Book of Conversations that was published posthumously about Goethe. And I started talking to the teacher about Goethe, talking about how that's really not characteristic of his whole life. And my teacher clearly had not read anything that he had written. And, after quoting him in the middle of class to a bunch of students who don't know who Goethe is, apart from the fact that he's like some German, writer, he said to me, the person who's, paying him to teach me, that, oh, you know more about Goethe than me. The teacher says to me. And I'm like, you're right. So why are you quoting bullshit? That's what it's really unbelievable. And this guy's like almost 3 times my age. But anyway, let's see here. Which chapter am I going to read? Let's see, chapter 44, 1097. Yeah, I've been really enjoying Melville lately, which is not hard to do, but it's always nice. Alright, so chapter 44 of The Confidence Man, in which the last 3 words of the last chapter are made the text of discourse, which will be sure of receiving more or less attention from those readers who do not skip it. And the last 3 words are quite an original, in all caps. Quite an original, a phrase we fancy rather oftener used by the young or the unlearned or the untraveled than by the old or the well-read or the man who has made the grand tour. Certainly the sense of originality exists at its highest in an infant, and probably at its lowest in him who has completed the circle of the sciences. As for original characters in fiction, a grateful reader will, on meeting with one, keep the anniversary of that day. True, we sometimes hear of an author who, at one creation, produces some 2 or 3 score such characters. It may be possible. But then they can hardly be original in the sense that Hamlet is, or Don Quixote, or Milton's Satan. That is to say, they are not, in a thorough sense, original at all. They are novel, or singular, or striking, or captivating, or all 4 at once. More likely, they are what are called odd characters, but for that are no more original than what is called an odd genius, in his way, is. But if original, whence came they, or where did the novelist pick them up? Where does any novelist pick up any character? For the most part in town, to be sure. Every great town is a kind of man-show where the novelist goes for his stock, just as the agriculturist goes to the cattle show for his. But in the one fair, new species of quadrupeds are hardly more rare than in the others are new species of characters. That is, original ones. Their rarity may still the more appear from this, that while characters merely singular imply but singular forms, so to speak, original ones, truly so, imply original instincts. In short, a due conception of what is to be held for this sort of personage in fiction would make him almost as much of a prodigy there, prodigy, there, as in the real history, is a new lawgiver, a revolutionizing philosopher, or the founder of a new religion. In nearly all the original characters, loosely accounted such in the works of invention, there is discernible something prevailingly local, or of the age, which circumstance of itself would seem to invalidate the claim, judged by the principles here suggested. Furthermore, if we consider what is popularly held to entitle characters in fiction to being deemed original is but something personal, confined to itself. The character sheds not its characteristic on its surroundings, whereas the original character, essentially such, is like a revolving Drummond light, raying away from itself all round it. Everything is lit by it, everything starts up to it. Mark how it is with Hamlet, so that in certain minds there follows upon the adequate conception of such a character an effect in its way akin to that which in Genesis attends upon the beginnings of things. For much the same reason that there is but one planet to one orbit, so can there be but one such original character to one work of invention. Two would conflict to chaos. In this view, to say that there are more than one to a book is good presumption there is none at all. But for new, singular, striking, odd, eccentric, and all sorts of entertaining and instructive characters, a good fiction may be full of them. To produce such characters, an author, beside other things, must have seen much, and seen through much. To produce but one original character, he must have had much luck. There would seem but one point in common between this sort of phenomenon and fiction and all other sorts. It cannot be born in the author's imagination, it being as true in literature as in zoology, that all life is from the egg. In the endeavor to show, if possible, the impropriety of the phrase, quite an original, as applied by the barber's friends, we have at unawares been led into a dissertation bordering upon the prosy, perhaps upon the smoky. If so, the best use the smoke can be turned to will be, by retiring under cover of it, in good trim as may be, to the story. And the next chapter is chapter 45. The cosmopolitan increases in seriousness. So, yeah, if you don't like that, you might as well stop reading. And, yeah, I guess that's all I wanted to do. And, yeah, I guess if you have any stories about people who are unbelievably stupid and, well, I guess, I'll mention one more of my favorite writers, William Gaddis. And, one of my favorite quotes is of William Gass talking about William Gaddis. And this is what he says in 1994, by the time William Gaddis is a recognized genius. Critics read no better than they ever did, but they are respectful now. They are terrified of making fools of themselves, which is an improvement. And that's about my opinion of it, too. And then he ends the talk by saying, I find myself momentarily happy that man is such a mean and selfish small-time hustler, for he thereby furnishes William Gaddis such a satisfying target. And, yeah, I would say if you haven't read the Recognitions yet, although it's a long book, it's one of the most important to read, so I would recommend it. So, Death is a Gang Boss.